Good afternoon. I'm Vikram. I'm from the outreach office at Ahmedabad University, which is in Gujarat in India. And Lea and Lorraine, I've just been told there's nobody to introduce us. So we'll have to introduce ourselves. So fortunately and unfortunately, both of them couldn't travel to India. So both of them are joining me virtually. And Lorraine, why don't you go ahead first and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Lorraine Castañares. And first of all, I'm very happy to be here, and I want to thank Vikram for being here in person. So I work as a college counselor for Escuela Sierra Nevada in Mexico City. It's actually 3 a.m. here. And I also am the co-chair for the Latin American Committee for IC3, and I'm very happy to be here. I hope you enjoy our conversation.
Thank you, Lorraine, and I'm really sorry on behalf of all of us for waking you up and making you do this at 3 a.m. I hope your kids are asleep and all is well. Lea, why don't you go ahead?
Hello, everybody. Namaste, Pura Vida. I guess so. Lorraine once again for waking up so early this morning. So I represent Venus University in Indonesia, basically I recruit and engage international students in Venus University. I am especially passionate about working with international students and with high-achieving low-income students. So my perspectives today will be shared from that angle. Once again, thank you for joining us for this conversation today.
Thank you. And I have, of course, spent about now 8 years in university recruitment. I've mostly worked with Indian universities. I worked with a design school first in Mumbai and another liberal arts college called Kriya University, which is based in South India, in Andhra Pradesh, and now I'm with Ahmedabad. And I think when we started talking about this session, I think what we wanted to do is there's been so many discussions on admission processes. It's such a critical thing for students, and with everything around us changing, we're still holding on to the admission processes that we've been following for a very, very long time. We also wanted to bring in context from 3 different continents. We've actually gone the farthest in the world, like Mexico and Indonesia and India. So I think we're representing really, very, very diverse perspectives. And we wanted to discuss and bring some unique things that universities are doing. What are some of the challenges that are being faced in the current admission processes? And how do counselors actually, influence or help students through this journey? Both counselors in schools and counselors who are university representatives. And Lea, did you want to add something? Okay, great. So I think, can we go to the slide now? So the structure of the conversation really is that we are going to give you some context of all of these 3 places, of how higher education system works. Many of you who are not from India, we are also going to talk about how higher education in India works, how admissions happens, all of that. So once we've given you some context, we'll move into the dialogue about discussing challenges, discussing some ideas that work for us, bringing access in admission process and all of that. And we want you to be participative. I know it's post-lunch. I know most of you are sleepy, but let's get asking questions. Please feel free to give any inputs that you have or raise your hands if you want to add anything. Let's make it conversational. So yeah, I think the next slide. Lorraine, do you want to take it from here?
Sure, absolutely. So this slide is about Mexico, and it is the first thing I would like. Perhaps you don't know much about Mexico, and this is a slide that gives an overview, according to my opinion, of how things are and what we can learn from them. So the first idea I have is that when we talk about power, and this is interesting, when we talk about power, who has the power of choosing? So regularly in Mexico, students feel that they are choosing a university versus being chosen by a university. And I thought that this was a very, very interesting point that we could start discussing, right? The next one is that, believe it or not, there's no standardized high school test that every single Mexican takes when they finish high school, which makes it complicated in a way, but it also gives us some freedom. Interestingly, obviously there's a difference between public and private universities, and my point of view as a high school counselor is that the competitiveness among universities is not so much based on ranking or perhaps, let me think, certifications. Sometimes it's based on marketing. And this makes sense with what I've just mentioned, where the student feels that he or she has the power to choose and not be chosen. I think that that's an important factor. In terms of access, Mexico has positioned its schools and high schools called orientadora vocacional, but sometimes these orientadores do not speak English. So immediately, if they're not bilingual, they are kind of lost, they lose a lot of the opportunities that could be open for them. And that's what we're working on in the LATAM committee. There is a traditional approach to studies, like in universities are very, very linear in their curriculum. And so a liberal arts concept is very new here, like the idea of choosing and creating your own path. And finally, this is something I really love about my country, soft skills and how much influence you have on the community service are very, very, very prioritized. So I think that, I hope I've given you an overview of Mexico, and if you have any doubts, well, obviously, you can ask me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lorraine. That was interesting, right? I mean, usually in India, you see universities which are very, very selective, especially the public universities. I mean, it's almost impossible to get into with acceptance rates less than 1%. And here there is another country where mostly students make decisions. I think that's very different from India, Lorraine. But yeah, Lea, do you want to go next? Tell us about Indonesia.
Yeah, so we have another very large country on our repertoire today. Indonesia has 270 million people, and it spreads essentially over 5,000 kilometers. Our higher education system includes over 3,500 institutions. Now, this means that the system is very vast, it's very varied. Generally, it's dominated by private universities. There are only 10% public universities. Public universities are heavily subsidized, and they are also considered to be one of the top options for education in Indonesia because they are centrally governed. Which means that the quality assurance is also stricter than it is at the 90% of the private universities in the country. There are some new options that have been developing over the last couple of decades in the private system in order to bridge this gap of quality. And to add to the options in Indonesia, which are not there now because of the few spots that are available at the public universities. So I want to compare the public universities and the private universities with international programs. The type of university that I represent as well. So when we speak about public universities specifically, if we talk about the admission process, public universities are centralized, like I mentioned before. So that means that, you know, we will choose a selection, maybe of 3 universities, even based on your scores, you will be placed into, hopefully, one of your options. The admission system is based heavily on academic results as well as on the entrance test, which is usually includes English, mathematics, and an aptitude test with smaller differences depending on the type of program that the student is interested in. Compared to this, at private universities, the admission is rolling because the students that don't enter the public university then have the option of joining the private university. So this is why private universities keep admissions rolling throughout the year. Private universities generally look at the entrance test, which is similar to what is available practiced at the public university. However, there is not so much emphasis on the grades. In other words, the private universities are attracting students who may not be top of their class to join them. The differences between courses is that at private universities, the focus is on academics, on research. At the private universities, they focus more on employability. In case of international programs, you know, we have hands-on type of program, lots of internships, lots of exposure to the industry, programs that are really aligned with the industry needs. Because the Indonesian families really value international education in the West, Australian, UK, also from the region, because of the known poorer quality of the Indonesian education. These international programs are generally offered as a double degree between the private university and a partner in one of these countries that I have been mentioning. Public universities are very affordable. They are heavily subsidized, with a fee ranging from $50 to maybe $2,000. Compared to that, the international programs are significantly more expensive at $7,000 to $12,000. There are scholarships available for the top performers, again, very, very few, both at public and at private universities with the international programs. If we're trying to reflect on guidance that Lorraine was mentioning before as well, when it comes to the admission process at the public universities, generally the students that are trying to apply may come from schools that have a guidance counselor, but there is a vast variety of schools, of course, without a guidance counselor, a number of public schools. So the students rely essentially on test centers. They may purchase tests from previous years, and this is how they essentially prepare for entering the university. When it comes to international programs, because of the cost of this program, generally students are applying from wealthier families, from middle-class families, which means that their school may have already had a guidance counselor who is then helping essentially with the decision making on which programs and universities to choose. However, like Lorraine was mentioning, the very important aspect here is the heavy marketing of the private universities and the internal competition. And this is something that the students need to go through in trying to essentially filter the noise from this competition that exists. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you,
So,
Lea.
so much for me for the moment, and I'll get back into some of the challenges and opportunities later on.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you. And I think that was very similar to India, isn't it? I think India is a subcontinent, of course. And usually when I'm representing the country, it's so hard because every part of the country is so different. India has over 1,000 universities. We have about 12,000 colleges, about 70,000 institutions. So it's really, really huge. And most of us only know of local universities and some national universities that are popular. So courses, usually traditional Indian universities offer courses that that have been running for a very, very long time. There's hardly any change that happens in curriculum. Of course, it keeps changing. But not as much as some of the private universities have been able to do. And some of the new universities that have come up, including Ahmedabad University, I think we offer a more student-friendly program. We offer programs that are liberal in nature. We offer programs where students can combine their interests. They can do things they like. They're based on project-based learning. They're based on experiential learning. Research has been a very strong part of all of the new universities that have come up. So that's a huge and a very stark difference between public and private universities. Admissions, there is an exam called NEET, which is what students in India give for medical tests. And there are about 1.8 million students who write that exam. It's one of the exams that is taken by the most number of students in India. And of course, most public universities take admission based on grade 12 scores. And there are colleges in India that has cutoffs of 100%. They stop students they fill the entire college with students who've got 100% scores. So it's insane in the way admissions happen in many public universities. Of course, since last year, some things are changing. We have something called COET, the Central University Admission Test, that's now coming up, where the government says that, okay, we are going to reduce the emphasis on grade 12 and we are going to have another common admission test. There are 1 million tests that the students have to write in India. Every university has its own admission test, unlike what many universities abroad do, where they have a common test like an SAT, which works for many, many universities. India, I think universities we also do subscribe to SAT, but we don't, that's not the only criteria that we look at, and most universities have their own admission tests. But when it comes to new age universities, I think the focus is more on the whole student, something that is practiced in the West mostly, but now a lot of Indian universities are going beyond marks, beyond grades, looking at students of what they've done. Most of them have personal interactions with students so that students aren't just an application number. They get to know of the application of the student before they, I was talking to Lea and I said, India follows a rejection model. It's not a selection, it's a rejection process. The public universities want to reject as many as they can, as quickly as they can, so that they only have to speak to a handful of students. We have the gift of population and the number of applications that come, right? So I think it's not their fault. They simply don't have processes through which they can filter. Versus private universities, I think we are quite capable of conducting a more personalized admission process. Fees, again, is such a huge range. I know of many colleges in India that has an annual fee of less than $100 per year. So public universities are extremely, extremely subsidized, and really anyone can afford to study in these colleges. When you go into private universities, it's still very, very affordable compared to the West, and compared to countries like Australia or most other Western countries, it's actually quite affordable. And students pay anywhere between $2,000 to about $15,000 a year as an annual fee. Now, when it comes to guiding students into these processes, into universities, in public universities, because there's such a huge competition, there's something called coaching institutes, or these are people who prepare students into they call it cracking an entrance exam. So there isn't really focus on thinking, there's no focus on learning, there's only focus on how can you solve a problem as quick as possible. So there's, like Ganesh in one of his sessions was telling me that, the revenue of all Indian schools put together is less than 3% of revenue of coaching institutes. Let that sink in, I mean, less than 3%. And that's where we are. So and it's, in all of this, imagine the student who's going through board exams, who's going through so much stress of getting into an Indian university. It's really bizarre in the way it works. Versus when it comes to new age universities, these are mostly students who come from well-to-do schools, private schools, schools that come to IC3 conference, schools like that who have guidance counselors who know what is a personal statement. Because in 95% of schools in India, they won't even understand what is a personal statement or what does an extracurricular mean. They do all of that, but they don't know about it. So I think when it comes to new age universities, there's a lot more awareness, and students go through career counselors, either in schools or they have private counselors who train them on how to apply, how to write their personal stories and things. So you see there's like two Indias. Actually, there are many Indias. This is just two extremes that I've put here. But I think post this, we want to take the conversation to what are some of the challenges that we are facing with the current admission process across the world, right? So I think, Lea, you want to go first and tell us about things that are specific to Indonesia and what are some of the challenges that you feel you're facing. And you already told us that there's heavy marketing that private universities do, which is not very uncommon in India or anywhere in the world. I think private universities do a lot more to promote themselves, and that is true for Indonesia as well. So do you want to talk about the challenges? And once we are through, I want some of our representatives from out of India or Indian universities, if you're here, tell us about what challenges you feel. Anjali, please feel free to add. Go ahead, Lea.
Yeah, so, going back to what you were saying earlier about the price essentially of the high quality private programs in emerging countries now like Indonesia and India, I think this is something that I would like to maybe first, before we go into challenges, just emphasize as really as an opportunity. Yeah. I think the fact that we have made this possible at our university, we have opened up essentially access in the region to high quality education now for the students from the middle class families. So I think by adding these types of programs, the access has been significantly improved and pushed down because $12,000, as you said, is far less than maybe $35,000 annually. Yeah. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity that we have here. Again, heavy marketing I have been mentioning, and this is something that's really, I guess, available more or less everywhere, but I have felt it in Indonesia as something that I felt we really had to deal with if we wanted to attract international students to Indonesia. So I feel that it's important. It's important to mention. And then if you think about the high achieving low income students, so students that are not from middle class families, again the access is still not there. So there is a heavy need really to extend the scholarship options for these students.
And Lorraine, did you have anything to add?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that, so the status quo, I think, with one of the challenges that we are all facing, and this is why we found this conversation so fascinating between Indonesia. We've met many times, and we've had long sessions, The challenges that we all share have to also to do with how do we communicate. It's not that marketing is evil, it's just that how do we have like a narrative that makes sense, right? Makes sense to counselors, and makes sense to reps, and makes sense to students. That's where I'm headed. So thank you.
Absolutely, and I'm talking from an Indian perspective and more from a private university perspective, right? Because I think I've just given you an overview of public universities. I mean, if we go that route, I mean, there's so many challenges. I'm only talking specifically from the new age Indian universities. There's so much disparity, right? There's a huge environmental bias that we as Indian universities have to face because, you know, India is so diverse. We have such, there's so much income inequality in India. We have students who come from such diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. Just to give you an example, you know, many universities have a concept of predicted scores, right? I'm sure most of your how many universities here take predicted scores while selecting students? Okay. So if we were to add predicted scores in India, you know, most of you get students from very well-to-do schools where there are counselors and there's a machinery to generate predicted scores. When we have students coming from state board schools in India, and which is a large number of students, the principal of the college doesn't know how many students study in the college. That's the state of many colleges in India. And for us to add layers and layers and make it more you know, student-friendly, we also have to think about everyone, every student who applies to us. There are many challenges that we face. Another challenge is also that we get students from very diverse boards across, and I'm sure, you know, other universities also must be facing this. I mean, we get students from EdXL to American diplomas to IB, Cambridge, A-levels, and we have maybe 50 or more than that boards in India. And each of those boards have different grading systems. They all have different exams in different times. You know, I know that so many times, and you know, most of us have a normalization that we do, and I don't know if counselors know this, but we all have normalization ways in which we try to bring those scores together. Like for instance, you know, I know that in the local boards, there are 2 local boards in India, which is popular ones, 2 national local boards, which is CBSE and ISC, right? These are the 2 boards that mostly schools follow. So if somebody is like, so for example, if you're comparing math as a subject between CBSE and ISC, we know that ISC scores more. We increase the scores in math and English in somebody who's done an ISC versus somebody who's done CBSE. We know that the curriculum and the rigor that English follows in one of these boards is higher than the other. So we do all of that, but it's again a challenge that we face, that, you know, how do you continue to, you know, get students from these boards, and how do you normalize that? But anybody wanted to add anything? What are some of the challenges you face in your current admission process? Yes. You only use the mic.
Sometimes talking about the national board in India, the only one that I face is I sometimes think the predicted scores are inflated, you know, just so that their students will get more scholarship. And when I receive the actual result, it becomes a challenge for us because we review all final results to review the scholarships. So that is a big, and that is particularly so not with international schools, but with national curriculums.
Absolutely, and you know, that's true. I mean, you know, though I think schools try their best, I know many schools, good schools, who have a very stringent mechanism of how do they do predicted scores. But you're right, because you know, we've also seen that in board exams, where there are schools in tier 2, tier 3 cities, or actually not just tier 2, tier 3, but anywhere, where there are schools helping students get good scores, or internal marking that happens in some of these boards. That's absolutely a challenge.
I was very surprised when at one school, the teacher said, we don't want them to feel that they are good students. We want to put the pressure on. So for pre-board exams that they have prior, preliminary exams, by intention we give them less marks. And I do not know what it does to the confidence of a child, but also as a university, I'm foxed, should I take the internal marks or should I take the predicted scores?
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else want to share anything?
Just want to add to that, grade 11 scores is another thing across schools. So, I mean, in fact, now we know that which school is evaluating I mean, like when we get applications from a school, I mean, by experience, we know you know, how strict a particular school and how difficult is their grading system versus another school where they're very generous with
The mean is 90%.
Yes. So I think we've, by experience over 15 years, we've gone through several admission processes, and what we've done is, we say give us the grade 11 scores, but then we don't make it mandatory for students
Sure.
to submit.
Sure.
And
Anybody
including
else?
the predictives, like, you know, I mean, if it's from a school, we know that this school is giving, because then, you know, when the
Sure.
real scores come, we know that it is very close to the predictives. So what we've done is put our own internal test in place. So that's why students are
So a million and
under
one
pressure
tests.
to go through so many entrance tests for each university.
Absolutely, Sadhana.
mean,
Anybody else? Any
if-
of my international
yeah.
university colleagues want to share anything? Yes, Vandana ma'am.
So I'm a school counselor, and the concerns are really genuine. And in fact, Anjali, I want to know, how do you deal in such a situation? Because when it's so common, then you would weigh every transcript in that manner, right? But there are some cases which are really genuine. Maybe the child has been very good, but due to some unforeseen situation, there was a drop in the grades. In that situation, do you get the things clarified with the school or the student?
Could you use the mic so they can hear it?
So what we do, fortunately, because we admit very limited number of students, you know, we know the file of each student. What we do is that if there is a huge jump from grade 10 to 12, I always go back to the counselor and I ask for grade 11 marks just to assess. And there's always a 10% I add if there's a jump. If there is a drop, then I again go back to the school if there's a counselor grade to understand what were the challenges, and then we ask them to write a small, you know, letter, justification as to why the student did not do well.
Sure.
There.
No, but I think we all go through that, right? As admissions officers, there's just so much that we do, and I think we are coming to, you know, in the next part of the presentation, talking about what are the things that we can do, you know, to be agile and things. Yes.
Can I just add on what you said? I represent one of the Australian university. So when, say, if you say take an A level or an IB, technically university places a lot of trust on the school, because we know that, you know, students who are coming are kind of, you know, from these categories. We did have one or two cases this time when the difference was like around 10 points. So which was like, you know, really a cause of concern. Usually how we do is, if it's an IB school or an A level, we do have a mechanism of taking, like as Anjali rightly said, few points higher, so that even if student is basically coming down, may not come down on 6 to 7, because school has the judgment level of the students because they judge. The only risk what school would run in those cases would be after, say, 1 or 2, that, you know, university will kind of stop taking the predictor from that school, which is not healthy.
Yeah.
You know, technically it is maybe one of the very prestigious schools, and as you said, some genuine reasons. Obviously, if the marks are something which is like there, then the options would be maybe pathways or something that, you know, the via channel, what we offer. So a lot of responsibility, ownership lies on the school as well when they are actually giving the predictor scores.
Yeah. No, I think normalization, you know, we can have another whole session about how normalization works. But I think we'll continue to the next slide. And we also want to talk about cultural differences. I think for international universities, this is a huge piece. In India, and I was discussing it with Lea and Lorraine, I think India does attract international students, but we mostly get students from the SAARC nations, from the Far East, from Africa, from Middle East, but not really from the West. Not yet, but hopefully so. With all these new universities that are coming up, I'm really hopeful that we are going to change the game and make India a hub for amazing education, which is very affordable. So hopefully, but Lorraine, I want to bring in you here and then Lea to talk about the cultural differences that plays a huge part in the admission process.
Thank you. So one of the most fun anecdotes that I would like to share with you is when Lea and I had made this little exercise about what would happen if a Mexican student wanted to go into an Indonesian university and an Indonesian student would like to go into a Mexican university. This was just an experiment we made, right? And it was very interesting. Well, just the answer is that they would not get into the universities in the country. That is the thing. And it was because for Indonesia, as Lea explained to me, it is very important to participate in certain contests and get kind of a ranking and everything else. Whereas, as I said, what would count forward to getting a scholarship in Mexico is if you have a lot of community service and in terms of extracurriculars. So this is just an interesting experiment. And also, as Vikram said, there are many Indias, there are many Mexicos. So we're obviously just playing with the concepts a little bit to learn from each other. So Lea, tell us what you think about what we talked. Thank you, Vikram.
Yeah, so definitely Indonesia is a hierarchical society. The values are placed on different things than it may be a case in a different culture. And that, of course, impacts as well how the admission system works. And what you were saying about competition, this is very much true. This also creates issues for students who have maybe attended, followed an international program in Indonesia and wanting to return back into the Indonesian system. Yeah, because for example in IB, the focus is on the whole person's development, similar to the situation in Mexico. Community development is very important. And the international schools don't prepare students for competitions, but you cannot get a scholarship without a competition. Yeah, that's one of the critical elements in essentially, the decision making on whether the student will get a scholarship or not. There is another element, I guess, of Indonesian culture, where the system works as a community. Indonesians are conversational. They don't necessarily like writing too much. They don't necessarily have very organized websites. This is what I was mentioning as well before. There is very little guides essentially available out there for students on how to prepare for the exams, because everything is kind of word of mouth based, which ends up being essentially handled by the test centers. Something to keep in mind as well. Yeah, some of the interesting aspects of culture's impact on admission processes. Back to you, Vikram.
Thank you. And for us, I think in this context, one of the biggest challenges that we also face is that, like I said, diversity not just in terms of boards and geographies, but also diversity in terms of a lot of first-generation college goers who are coming to school. And many of them, we expect, the programs that we offer are thinking-based. The programs that we offer require self-study, research, somebody who's well-read, who understands perspectives. And this for a student from Emerald Heights or from Utpal Sangvi is much easier. Or for somebody who's coming from, maybe Palakkad in Kerala in a very, very different setting, it's very different. their understanding of the world is very different from somebody who's even coming from Kashmir, where there is no internet for the last 2 years. So I think even within, students that apply to us, I think, where they come from, what has been their journey, I think that matters a lot, and that is something that we do consider when we are admitting students. Urban-rural divide is also a huge thing that creates these challenges for us. I want to quickly move because I want to have some time for questions. Stopped working? No. Can we go to the next slide? Sorry. Yeah. So we also wanted to give you some examples of university admission systems that facilitate access. I think we've spoken about challenges, but what are some of the things that some universities are doing uniquely that brings in access? And again, I want to invite Lea first, and then Lorraine.
One of the examples that I would like to mention is coming back to the testing. When we think about testing, I was just saying how it actually doesn't facilitate access. But a part of the Indonesian admission entrance test is also an English test. Yeah. So this English test actually gives the opportunity to replace the English requirement, TOEFL or IELTS, which generally cost a lot or may not be accessible to students that may be in rural areas like you were mentioning. Yeah? Having these reliable tests developed by the universities themselves is one option that can help facilitate access, because of course language needs to be assessed before the students come in some way in order to make sure that they can academically succeed. Maybe Lorraine to you so that we can move faster.
Yes, absolutely. Well, in my case, I'm just happy that the whole chaos created by the pandemic has made universities question themselves about their existing systems, and they want to create new systems, or they're asking themselves how to improve access, taking into account that there's a huge inequality gap between public and private system, the public and private system, educational system in Mexico. So at least people are questioning themselves, but we don't have an answer yet.
Absolutely. I think, for me, in Ahmedabad, one of the things we've been debating now is to have a test. And, I've spoken to so many counselors, and there's like one gang which says that no, never, don't have another test. It just doesn't work. And there are so many studies. In fact, our dean of the School of Management, Professor Devnath Tirupati, he has been in some of the top leading institutions in India, abroad, as a leader. And he's told me so many times that most of these tests that universities take to assess students before they admit have no correlation to how they perform after they're admitted into a university. It just doesn't say that if somebody scored well on a test means they'll do well in the university. So I think we have yet not had a test, and we continue to deal with this normalization, but I think that's one way for universities to, and I think many universities, even abroad, have now made SAT optional, which is, I think, a way towards creating more access to students from across the world. SAT is an expensive test when it comes to an Indian context. And I know College Board gives a lot of scholarships on application, but it still isn't always, enough. Also, I think, one of the other things I wanted to also talk about is many universities have now started looking at personal essays or personal statements. I think that is also a huge way in understanding a student a little bit better before you reject or before you select anyone. I think that the whole idea of the holistic selection process is also that, you don't get selected on either one parameter, or you don't get rejected on either parameter. I think that's some of the things. I remember in one of my previous universities that I was representing, there's something called an immersion case, where we actually make students go through case studies. We put them, these are simple things that can be done. Because you get such diverse set of students, you create multiple ways in which you assess students. So there are some students who might thrive in a conversation, where you put 5 students together and they just outshine because they can work with others. They have amazing collaboration skills. Then, they were made to present what they understood of a case. Some people are just very good in speaking or presenting. Post which each of them had to write about their observation, and post which everybody had an individual interaction. I think as universities, we'd have to give students and applicants more and more ways to tell us what kind of potential do you have, what can you bring into the university. And I remember when we were doing this immersion case, we had to take them out to a lake in Hyderabad, by the way. I don't know, any of you know, Durgam Cheruvu is such a beautiful lake. It's very close from here. And we were to take them to the lake to understand public-private partnerships and how this lake was revived. And one of the faculty members spoke about, do we have a wheelchair? What if there is a student who comes who will not be able to walk? I think it's important to think about the last student or a last applicant when we are making policy. And I think some universities do this better. But I think some examples that we wanted to share. Can we go to the next slide? I think we have 10 minutes. We also want to talk about COVID-19, right? I think like Lorraine was saying, that COVID-19 shook us up. All universities that were on high horses and said, we will not, this is our deadline, 12 p.m., 12:01, we will not accept. I think a lot of us have learned how COVID and made so many changes because of COVID. But again, I invite both of you to add points that we discussed. Lea, you can go first.
So just a funny anecdote with this test, right? So we had this admission test, and then when we were thinking, okay, how to reach out to the international students, before COVID, we were having these funny ideas and discussions that, maybe we should be taking the admission test with us and proctor it somewhere on site in foreign countries. And, it would have been just so incredibly impractical. And it was impossible to imagine anything different, yeah? And I mean, I'm sure you can imagine what happened once COVID-19 came. It wasn't a problem to do anything online after that.
Lorraine, did you want to add, or do we move?
The very fact that Lea and yourself and myself got together to kind of discuss for this panel, I think is something that I always talk about my pre-internet brain that I rarely remember, and I also don't remember how the world was without Zoom. And because it's become so easy for us. Oh, look at what we're doing. I think that the impact it's had also has been in the flexibility and in inviting us to, we're at a good time, a point in time, where we can think of diverse ways of looking at diverse students.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Absolutely, very.
Diverse methods instead of just one set path. That I think will help us all.
And I think one of the instances I want to highlight in my own university, this time we were doing interviews. Actually, we like to call it, don't call it as interviews, we like to call it as interactions, because they really are interactions where faculty is not grilling you on things that you don't know, but they actually want to know what you know, and they want to indulge you and get to know you more. And we had a student from Karnataka. We work with this NGO called the Karta Initiative, and they work with very, very below poverty line students, income less than ₹1,00,000 a year. And we have full financial aid available for students who can't afford the program. And there was a student who couldn't understand English as well. I mean, he couldn't communicate and understand, and he was from Karnataka, where the local language is called Kannada, right? And I happened to be from that state, so I was part of that interview. That was the only interaction I was a part of, because I'm not in the admissions office. But I think taking that extra effort is what COVID has taught all of us, that we just cannot, I think we have to think from a student's perspective in every assessment that we do as universities. Moving to the last part of the presentation, I think this one, Lea is very, very passionate about. I think as university representatives, all of us have a very important role to play in how students approach the admission process. And Lea, go ahead and tell us about it.
Yeah, so again, we're a university in Indonesia. We have excellent programs, but we're not known internationally. And in order to get people to start thinking about your program, you have to be different. You have to be different in the way you approach as well your marketing, right? We have moved from that pushy sales, especially in our international student recruitment, towards really selecting people that have passion for working with youth, for guiding students to be our admission officers. We select people who may have worked for the agencies, who during the interview show that they want to work with the students. Then we give them a little bit of an intercultural training as well, and we make sure that they understand the BINUS programs and BINUS culture very well as well. Because again, it comes down to the best fit. So if the student somehow is expecting a research-oriented academic program, BINUS may not be the right place, right? So there are different programs with different strengths, and so often they're more career-oriented. If I can go back to how we essentially adjusted as well the scholarship selection process, is that we made sure that we develop a comprehensive evaluation scheme where the students then where we look at everything, not just competitions, not just at grades, but also at volunteer work, at recommendations. And the interview is a very important aspect of the selection process, where we again look at the students' intercultural ability, and familiarity with the institutions that are applying to.
Yeah, Lorraine, did you?
Alongside with the marvelous friendship that I created with Lea and Vikram through this experience, I think that we wanted to have a clear takeaway, and the takeaway that we arrived to is that there should be some kind of professional development for representatives that goes beyond marketing, and it should be like the figure or the role of the representative has to align and resonate better, perhaps, with what we do as counselors. And I think that would respond to some of the challenges we're facing in this world right now, for all the reasons we've talked about. Yes.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. I think it's okay. It happens that, we all have, especially my colleagues from universities, we do have, we always have a target, so to say, sorry for the lack of a better word, on number of applications, on how many countries should be represented, on what should be our yield, and what should be our application to enrollment ratio. But at the end of all of it, I think it's important that we remember that the right student comes to our universities. And I think in the last 2 years, last 2 days in the IC3 conference, we've had multiple sessions where this has been emphasized, that a role of a university representative is actually the role of a counselor, where you are hand-holding them, where you're a lot of times kids come to me and they ask me for a program that we don't have, and I do recommend them other universities that offer that. And it isn't fair for us to, like yesterday, Vandana ma'am, we were presenting a session and she said, I had a student who wanted to do design, and there is this other university which offers liberal arts, and they said, no, we have one course in design, and why don't you come and you can do this? And the student is actually now miserable. So I think it is important for us to remember that, you know, we are not just responsible for admitting, you know, we are not just responsible for getting students into the first week of orientation. I think it's really important that we guide them through the process. And these processes are actually very complex, so I think it's important we do that. I think there's some chat that is also there. So yes, we actually wanted to build an ideal model for admissions, but again, it isn't possible because, you know, one of the things as a university representative, when we have students, right, throngs of students who come to us and say, so who do you select? Tell me, what is the profile? And, you know, more times than less, I actually don't give them a profile. The minute you give them a template, they just don't, you know, then you're coloring their thoughts. That's the same thing that happens when people ask for cutoffs. So, you know, once you tell them it's like this, and then they, you know, like, they just then self-eliminate themselves, or they start thinking that this isn't good for them, or they will start fitting into that template. Most universities are not looking for pawns in a chess set. You know, we are looking for a cohort, and it has to be students who fit in well with each other. So again, we've not created a best admission process because we feel, look at the conversation today. I mean, these 3 countries, and within these 3 countries, the diversity that exists in terms of the profile of students. So we've not created a model, but I think really the message that we wanted to also give is that, you know, universities have to be flexible. I think really, really flexible. You know, we can have all the deadlines in the world. We can all have the list of things that we want. But at the end of the day, students come from different backgrounds, different perspectives. So we have to understand and accept that in the way they are. Thank you so much. But any questions? I think we don't have time, but maybe any 1 or 2 questions or comments. Any last words, Lea and Lorraine?
Sure.
Nothing from me. I think everything important has been said. Just I want to thank everybody again for joining in on the conversation.
Great, thank you so much.
Well, we want to invite you to continue this conversation and to be brave and find people from Indonesia, Mexico, India, Croatia, and open up a conversation, because many things can be learned from others and listening to others. And I just want to say 2 things. I want to say happy birthday, Vikram. And I want to say thank you to my friend Anna Marina, who woke up at 3 a.m. alongside with me here, and she's here in Mexico. So thank you, everyone. I'm very grateful for being here.
Thank you.